These are the top 6 hair transplant questions that I get in my practice. Let's go. Question number 1. Are plugs still being used today? And the answer is sort of. So plugs were these large 4mm punches that were being done from the back of the scalp and moved over to the front. And that was the technique that was used for many years prior to the advent of FUT surgery, where we started to take a strip from the back of the scalp, cut it up under the microscope into these little grafts, and put the grafts in one by one. And this led to more natural results at the recipient area compared to transplanting entire islands of hair. So then, after that, in about 2010, we switched over to an FUE procedure, which is follicular unit extraction. That's one by one extraction of follicles, and that those are then transferred to the front. Compared to FUT, it's the same exact thing as far as the recipient area. The difference is the way that the scars then look on the back of the scalp, and we'll actually go through this a little further on in this video. But these days, these FUE punches are miniaturized versions of plugs. So instead of being 4mm in what we remove, generally the punches for FUE are anywhere from 0.8mm to about 1.0mm. So they're at most about a quarter of the size of those original punches. So that leads to improved scarring in the back as well as more natural results in the front. Question number 2. Can you borrow hair from a friend, a family member, just somebody else? I get this question quite a bit, and to me, the answer is always just so obvious, and yet I realize that the information isn't out there on, the thought process behind this. So the short answer is no. The hair that you transplant for a hair transplant has to come from somewhere on your body and is moved to another location on the body. So the reason you can't take hair from another person is that we have protective mechanisms in our bodies. We have an immune system that will target any sort of foreign cell, and that could include even a brother, a sister, a family member, and it definitely includes people who are not even related to you. So the only way that the hair would survive if you're taking it from someone else is you'd need to be on immunosuppressive medications, and these are the types of things that people get when they're getting like a full organ transplant, like a kidney or something. So obviously those are life-saving surgeries, whereas a hair transplant is a elective cosmetic surgery, and so we would never put someone on these types of strong immunosuppressive medications just to get them more hair. So for that reason, we do not get hair from other people. It's got to come from the same person. Question number 3. If I get a hair transplant, do I still need to be on medical therapy? This question comes up often. A lot of people think that the surgical transplant is going to replace the need for any medical therapy, and that's just not true in most situations. I try to tell people that these are not mutually exclusive modalities for improving your hair. Most of the time, you need the medical therapy to preserve and strengthen your existing hairs. And then you do surgery to augment those results. Doing surgery without considering the state of your existing hairs in that area can actually lead to problems such as shock loss. It can lead to further just natural progressive loss of your pre-existing hair, in which case you'll only have your transplanted hairs left, and the overall result will just not look as impressive. So as much as people don't often want to hear about medical therapy, I often will bring that up in consultation because it is very important. And then a follow-up question to that is, well, how long do you have to be on medical therapy for? And for most people, the answer is for as long as you want to preserve your hair and for as long as you want your hair to look as good as possible. If you stop caring, then great, stop the medical therapy. But for most people who are investing their time and money into getting a hair transplant, they usually care about their hair, and so the medical therapy component is equally as important in many cases as the surgery itself. Question number 4. Can I get surgery for hair with hair being moved from a different part of the body, such as the chest, the neck, pubic area? I've heard all types of different suggestions. And the answer is sometimes. You generally want to take hair from the scalp whenever you're moving it to any other part of the body. So if you want more hair on your arms, let's just say, for whatever reason. I have seen situations like that. The best place to get the hair will still be from the scalp, generally from the back of the scalp. If it's a more classic type of transplant, such as from the scalp to the scalp, again, the hair is coming from the head. Now, there are times when we get donor hair from other parts of the body, but there's a reason why we don't do that as like a first line approach or as kind of first choice. And the reason is because the hairs on the other parts of the body are not as often in the anagen phase of the hair cycle. So the anagen phase is the growth phase for hair, and you want to take from the scalp because there are more hairs in that anagen phase. Hair from other parts, like from the chest, the neck, other areas, they're less predictable because they're less likely to grow in the new recipient area. That's one reason why we don't like to take from other parts of the body unless we really have to. If someone's running out of their donor supply in the scalp and they're desperate for more hair, then we consider other options. My next favorite place is always the neck, especially obviously in male patients, and then after that would be the chest. But the neck and chest are not going to heal quite as well as scalp. The neck actually heals quite well, but the chest is going to have more obvious dot scars because the blood supply is more poor. And that's another reason why we really prefer not to take from other parts of the body. But that is a different discussion than putting hair onto other parts of the body. That's more of the recipient area. And for that, we consider areas like eyebrows, beards, sometimes pubic hair transplants. And so it's okay to put hair there if we're taking it from a very reliable source, such as the scalp. Body hair discussion has to do with donor hair as well as recipient hair and recipient areas. So it's a complex discussion, but hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more about body hair transplant. Question number 5. Is there an age minimum or a maximum for getting a hair transplant? The answer is not really. On the younger side, you have to make sure that if you're doing an elective procedure that the patient can either consent, meaning at least in the United States that they're at least 18 years of age, or that if there's a very unique situation, like let's say we have a younger patient who's a burn victim, that they have a parent who's able and willing to consent. For a younger patient, I always want to make sure that they're on board and that they understand which procedure is being done and that they're able to be part of that decision making. And again, a younger patient under 18 would really only be a consideration for hair transplant surgery if they've had, for example, like an injury or certain types of cancers or burn patients, very specific, more reparative, reconstructive type of approaches as opposed to purely cosmetic. Now, if someone is 18, you don't necessarily want to jump into a hair transplant unless there's a specific, again, case for that. So some patients who are in their late teenage years have very aggressive androgenic alopecia. You don't necessarily have to wait until they're 35 to do a hair transplant if they're already progressive, like say Norwood 6, 7, as a teenager. So there are times when we consider a hair transplant for a younger patient, but again, these have to be very carefully thought out. As far as the older ages, patients who are, say, into their 70s and 80s and decide one day that they want a hair transplant, there's nothing that is stopping them or stopping me from doing that type of procedure. We just, again, we want to understand their goals, we want to make sure they have a good donor supply, and then it's okay as long as they're in good health and can tolerate this type of procedure, then it's okay to proceed to a hair transplant. So there's no age where we can no longer do a hair transplant. Question number 6, will I have scars? Some people are under the impression that now with the FUE techniques, that there are just no scars, that you can do a hair transplant and not get any scars, and that's just not true. FUE surgery still leaves patients with dot scars on the back of their head typically. Now, FUT, which is the strip technique, does leave a linear scar, and a lot of patients choose to not undergo FUT because they don't want that linear scar, and that's what's made the FUE technique more popular. But keep in mind, even with FUE, depending on how FUE is performed, you can get some unfavorable scars. So if the punch size is too big, if the extraction technique is so close together, if you extract grafts right next to each other, what happens is you have one scar and then you took a hair right next door, so now you have another scar, and you can get fusion of those scars that then expand into larger scars and ultimately can leave the back of the head looking pretty bare. So it's possible to do FUE technique and have pretty good scarring, but it's still scarring. So I like to tell patients that there is no miracle. If you're having surgery, you'll always have some form of a scar, but you can definitely minimize it with good technique and with proper planning. We have a lot more educational material for hair transplant surgery on this channel, so please make sure to check that out and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.